This video is sponsored by Nvidia AI. The winter of 1943 to 44 had turned the Italian campaign into a brutal meat grinder for the Allies. What began as a bold push into Europe's soft underbelly had twisted into a drawn-out, brutal struggle along the Gustav Line, where every inch of ground was paid for in blood. At its heart stood Monte Cassino, crowned by a 1,400-year-old abbey. A massive and ancient sanctuary of faith that had survived countless wars was now looming over the carnage below. The once serene building had seemingly become an impenetrable fortress. For months, wave after wave of Allied soldiers surged forward to take it, only to be torn apart by German machine guns and artillery. Over 50,000 men fell as casualties under the Abbey's indifferent gaze. Each failed assault fed a growing desperation that was quickly turning into rage. Suspicion amongst the Allies became paranoia. The Germans must be using the Abbey, perched far above its surroundings, as a forward observation post. From there, the Germans could call down their lethal artillery with uncanny precision. The local abbot pleaded for mercy and claimed no German soldiers were inside. However, Allied commanders, pushed to their limits by mounting casualties and political pressure, began to see the Abbey as a threat that had to be eliminated. It is said that the horrors of the devil himself had to be beaten in order to lay the first stone of the Abbey centuries earlier. And now the building was to face the terror of a most modern reign of fire. A new force has emerged in the battle to create better AI videos, Nvidia AI v3. This impressive update is your intelligence officer, your war correspondent, your combat camera operator, and your strategic planner, all consolidated into one formidable unit. Nvidia AI v3 doesn't just provide you with a single-shot weapon, it's an entire content creation arsenal rolled into one, the only tool you'll need. Better yet, it's not just about editing existing footage, it's about generating entire videos from scratch that are instantly ready to be shared with your legions of followers. Ready to see this game-changing tool in action? We deployed Nvidia AI v3 on a critical mission to produce some B-roll style footage of the Big Sur. In just a few minutes, this is what it delivered. A medal-worthy performance, wouldn't you agree? If you don't like something, just use an edit command like use my voice. And that's not all it can do. Whatever type of content you have in mind, from relaxation videos to commercials, Nvidia AI v3 is the hero you can always rely on, your most loyal ally. Just sit back and watch while Nvidia AI v3 brings your ideas to life with sniper-like precision. It's a guaranteed victory. The good news from the front line is that, unlike many other AI video tools which have so far failed to materialize, Nvidia AI v3 is going to be ready for action in just a few weeks. If you haven't deployed it yet, now's the time to mobilize. Follow the link in the description to try the current version for free and join our ranks. Better yet, with paid plans starting at just $20 per month, you can use our code WW250 to receive double the video creation minutes for your first month. Don't miss out on this major tactical advantage. Launch your content creation offensive with Nvidia AI today. The Italian campaign began with hopes that Italy would serve as an unexpected pathway for the Allies to break into Hitler's fortress Europe. But by early 1944, that optimism had turned to frustration and despair. The German defense had dug in deep, transforming Italy's rugged, mountainous terrain into a fortress. At the heart of this defense rose the Gustav Line, an impenetrable barrier that stretched across the width of the entire country. Anchored by the towering peak of Monte Cassino, this line blocked the Allies' path to Rome. Monte Cassino mountain itself dominated the landscape, rising 1,700 feet above the valley, with the ancient Abbey perched at its summit. The Germans knew the strategic value of this position, and so did the Allies. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the German commander on the Italian front, was a master of defensive warfare. Recognizing the natural advantages offered by Italy's rugged terrain, Kesselring transformed the country into a series of choke points, using the mountains and valleys to create natural fortresses. Monte Cassino became one of his most daunting bastions, serving as an impenetrable shield that blocked the Allied advance toward Rome. The Abbey stood like a silent guardian over the battlefield, and to the troops below, it was an unblinking eye that watched their every move, an ever-present reminder of the enemy's dominance. For the men down in the valley, every botched attack seemed to be caused by the Abbey, which they were convinced was the linchpin in the Germans' ability to rain destruction down upon them. The paranoia and fear were palpable. British Lieutenant Bruce Foster spoke about the Abbey's role in the loss of someone close to him. Quote, "Can you imagine what it's like to see a person's head explode in a great flash of grey brains and red hair? Can you imagine what it is like when that head belonged to your sister's fiancé? I knew why it happened. I was positive it was because some bloody Jerry was up there in that bloody monastery directing the fire that killed Dickie, and I know that still." Lieutenant Claire Cunningham echoed this belief, saying, quote, "It seemed like we were under observation all the time. They were just looking down on us all day long. They knew every move we were making." This conviction turned the Abbey into an object of dread and hatred. No matter how carefully the Allies maneuvered, they could never escape its gaze. It seemed to be the key to the Germans' defense. Throughout the winter months, the casualties continued to increase, reaching almost 11,000 by January 1944. Their bodies accumulated against the towering fortifications of the Gustav Line. The relentless artillery barrages destroyed any chance of advancement, and each attack resulted in bloody repulsion. The German defenders, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, had expertly used the Abbey's vantage point, or so the Allies believed, to repel every assault. The psychological toll became unbearable. Morale plummeted. Major General Lyman Lemnitzer described frontline units as, quote, "disheartened, almost mutinous. They felt trapped in the valley, frozen in their foxholes." The Abbey wasn't just an obstacle. It was the embodiment of their failure to break through the Gustav Line. As the Allies grew more desperate, they came to one undeniable conclusion. To advance, to break the German hold, they would have to destroy the Abbey at Monte Cassino. It had become, in their eyes, the heart of the enemy's power. However pivotal the destruction of the Abbey seemed to many Allied commanders, actually doing so threatened to be a diplomatic and humanitarian nightmare. The Abbey of Monte Cassino was a symbol of European history and culture, a sacred site that had stood watch over the valley for over 1,400 years. Founded in 529 AD by Saint Benedict, it was the birthplace of the Benedictine order, a sanctuary of learning and faith that had weathered countless wars, invasions, and disasters. The cultural and religious influence of the building was so significant that both Germany and the Allies had made a promise to Pope Pius XII not to damage the monastery under any circumstances. Yet the Abbey's history was not without its own encounters with the forces of darkness. According to Pope Gregory I's dialogues, when St. Benedict first ascended Monte Cassino to establish the monastery, he did so by confronting none other than the devil himself. Gregory recounts how Benedict destroyed the pagan altar and drove out the forces of evil that had long haunted the mountain. The devil, furious at being expelled from his ancient seat, resisted fiercely. Gregory wrote that it was only through spiritual warfare that Benedict was able to lay the foundation for what would become a sanctuary of Christian faith. Gregory proclaimed, quote, "Here the ancient serpent dwelt, but he was cast out, never to return." The perception that the Abbey was once again a modern evil grew day by day. Every time German artillery fire rained down on the Allied lines with precision, every time a soldier fell, there was a sense that somewhere within the Abbey's thick, ancient walls, German observers were calmly directing the carnage below. Sergeant Evans, a British soldier, put this growing sentiment into words when he described the Abbey as, quote, "malignant. It was evil somehow. I don't know how a monastery can be evil, but it was looking at you. It was all devouring. It had a terrible hold on us soldiers. It just had to be bombed." For Evans and countless others, the Abbey was no longer a historical monument, it was the enemy. Soon, the idea that the Germans were exploiting this cultural treasure for military gain became accepted as fact, a reality that gnawed away at the Allied ranks with each passing day. For the commanders, this perception presented a dilemma. Destroying the Abbey would mean defying the principle of protecting cultural heritage, an idea the Allies had sworn to uphold. But the cries of the soldiers below, men who lived and fell in the Abbey's shadow, grew louder. By early February 1944, the perception had solidified into an unshakable conviction. The Abbey was not just an obstacle, it was the primary cause of their predicaments. It was this belief, this certainty that the Abbey was the key to breaking the German defenses, that would ultimately lead to one of the most controversial decisions of the entire campaign. But the truth of what lay behind those ancient walls remained hidden, concealed beneath layers of fear, anger, and desperation. Reports streamed in from Allied reconnaissance teams, painting a picture of an enemy entrenched within the Abbey's ancient walls. American General Jacob Devers declared with unwavering certainty, quote, "The monastery must be destroyed and everyone in it, as there is no one in it but Germans." This sentiment reverberated through the ranks of the Allied command, bolstered by aerial photographs that seemed to suggest movement around the Abbey. Pilots reported seeing figures in uniform, claiming that German soldiers were using the structure as an observation post. These reports, filtered through layers of fear and frustration, added fuel to the growing belief that the Abbey was the linchpin of the German defense. On February 11th, as Allied propaganda prepared to justify any possible action against the Abbey and its inhabitants, the Daily Mail ran a lead story titled, quote, "Nazis turn casino monastery into fort." Yet, conflicting evidence continued to emerge, muddying the waters. Some reports claimed the Abbey housed only monks and civilians, refugees who had taken shelter within its walls to escape the relentless bombardment. Father Gregorio Diamare, the Abbey's abbot, had sent messages pleading with the Allies, insisting that no German troops were inside and that the monastery remained a sanctuary, not a fortress. These pleas fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the sound of artillery and the cries of soldiers demanding action. As the debate raged, the pressure from above intensified. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, impatient with the lack of progress, demanded to know, quote, "What are you doing sitting down there doing nothing?" These words cut through the hesitation, driving home the urgency that gripped every Allied commander. Pressure was reaching a boiling point, and that was when the unthinkable happened. A junior communications officer intercepted a radio message confirming the Allies' suspicions. Quote, "The battalion is with the monks in the monastery." It all added up. The Germans were not only using the Abbey as an observation post, but as a full-fledged fortress. That piece of information was all Field Marshal Lord Alexander of Tunis, Deputy Supreme Allied Commander in Europe and the leading British general in the liberation of Italy, needed to approve the destruction of the Abbey. As one of his aides later recorded, quote, "The intercept implied the Germans had broken their word. That exonerated the Allies and served as a green light for the bombing." On February 14, 1944, the order was given. The decision was made to destroy one of Europe's most cherished monuments, to erase in hours what had stood for over a millennium. That same night, Allied warplanes dropped thousands of leaflets in the region, warning that, in view of the German occupation of the sacred building, quote, "With very heavy hearts, we are going to have to turn our weapons on the Abbey." There was no turning back. The fate of Monte Cassino Abbey was sealed. On the morning of February 15, 1944, the ancient Abbey of Monte Cassino faced its day of reckoning. By 9:28 a.m., the skies were clear, and the valley echoed with an eerie stillness. Then the first wave of Allied bombers appeared on the horizon. From positions across the valley, hundreds of Allied soldiers, officers, and even journalists gathered to watch. There was a palpable sense of anticipation, as though they were attending a grand spectacle rather than witnessing the destruction of a cultural treasure. But a fatal error had been made. The junior communications officer heard a German officer ask, quote, "Ist Abt in Kloster?" or "Is the abbot in the monastery?" And then a second voice responded, quote, "Ja, in Kloster mit Mönchen." Yes, with the monks in the monastery. The communications officer confused the word for abbot with the word Abt as an abbreviation for Abteilung, the German term for a battalion. It was only when the bombers were already about to reach Monte Cassino that a British intelligence officer, Colonel David Hunt, reviewed the entire radio intercept transcript and noted something strange. But there was nothing that could be done. The largest raid of a single structure in World War II was already underway. War correspondent Martha Gellhorn captured the mood perfectly. Quote, "I watched the planes come in and drop their loads and saw the monastery turned into a muddle of dust and heard the big bangs and was absolutely delighted and cheered like all the other fools. Soldiers scrambled up trees and stone walls to get a better view, some sharing picnics of K-rations as though they were attending a holiday parade. For 4 relentless hours, wave after wave of bombers unleashed their payloads. In total, 256 bombers dropped 453 tons of explosives, their vapor trails crisscrossing the sky. Artillery from the ground joined in, pounding the target with thousands of shells. The New York Times later called it, quote, "the worst aerial and artillery onslaught ever directed against a single building." The Abbey stone walls, which had withstood centuries of conflict, now crumbled under the sheer force of modern warfare. By 1:33 p.m., it was over. Where once stood a monument to faith and history, there was now only rubble and ash spread across the 7-acre site. The destruction carried a bitter irony. As the dust settled, German paratroopers moved swiftly into the ruins, turning the broken remains into a fortress. By acting on their worst fears, convinced that the Abbey was a German stronghold, the Allies had destroyed the only thing preventing the Germans from taking the site. And now it truly was a German position that would be used against the Allied soldiers down in the valley. The rubble, twisted and jagged, provided perfect cover for machine guns, snipers, and artillery observers. Mark Clark, who had harbored reservations about the bombing, later called it, quote, "a tragic mistake," recognizing that the Allies had inadvertently given the Germans an even stronger defensive position. The impact of the bombing was immediate and profound. Soldiers who had once cheered now stared in stunned silence, realizing that the Abbey's destruction had gained them nothing. The ruins that remained did not offer the breakthrough they had hoped for, but instead presented an even more daunting obstacle. What had been intended as a decisive blow to the German defenses had, in reality, only made the mountain more impregnable. As reports filtered back to Allied headquarters, the sense of triumph was replaced with doubt, regret, and anger. The Abbey's destruction became a symbol of the futility and devastation of war, an act of desperation that had only deepened the quagmire. The dust had barely settled on the ruins of the Abbey when the devastating truth emerged. The Germans had never occupied it before its destruction. In one of the most tragic ironies of the war, the structure that the Allies believed to be a German stronghold had been left untouched by German forces out of respect for its cultural and historical significance. Field Marshal Kesselring had ordered his troops to stay clear of the Abbey, believing that its preservation would demonstrate Germany's commitment to protecting European heritage even amidst the chaos of war. German propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels wasted no time in seizing upon this revelation. He ensured that Don Gregorio Diamare, the Abbey's abbot who had miraculously survived the raid, was brought to a German radio station in Rome. With a voice heavy with emotion, the elderly abbot described the destruction, weeping openly as he recounted the loss of this sacred place. The broadcast spread across Europe, painting the Allies as senseless destroyers, barbaric forces willing to obliterate a millennium of history. German newsreels showed the haunting image of the Abbey's shattered remains, juxtaposed against images of Allied bombers, reinforcing the narrative that while Germany fought to protect European civilization, the Allies sought only to destroy it. In response, the Allies launched their own campaign to justify the bombing. American newsreels insisted that the bombing had been, quote, necessary because the structure had been turned into a fortress by the German army. General Mark Clark and other military leaders reiterated that the Abbey had been a legitimate military target, echoing the belief that German spotters had used it to direct artillery fire. President Franklin Roosevelt asserted that, quote, it was being used by the Germans to shell us, insisting that it was a German strongpoint. But as the months passed, these justifications began to unravel. What had once been a neutral, unoccupied monument was now a genuine strongpoint, occupied by determined German troops who used the rubble to halt the Allied advance even more effectively than before. The grim realization dawned on the Allies that they had played directly into German hands. Victor Cavendish Bentinck of the British Foreign Office captured the embarrassment and regret in a memo written 2 weeks later, quote, "We had better keep quiet about the lack of evidence regarding German occupation." This acknowledgement was buried in official records, but it would linger in the hearts of those who had witnessed the destruction. The legacy of Monte Cassino became one of sorrow and regret, a symbol of how fear and paranoia can lead to irrevocable decisions with devastating consequences. It took 3 more months of intense fighting to finally capture the Abbey's ruins, at the cost of 55,000 Allied casualties and 20,000 German losses. The Allies eventually succeeded, but their victory was hollow, overshadowed by the knowledge that they had destroyed something irreplaceable in the process. Years later, survivors like Cyril Hart returned to the mountain. Standing once more in the shadow of Monte Cassino, he recalled, quote, "That heartbreak mountain, which had cost the lives of so many infantrymen of all nations, came into view. Just for a moment, my heart stopped beating. That hasn't changed. It still loomed forbiddingly." Hart believed that the enemy who had looked down upon them still lingered, not in the form of German soldiers, but in the shadows of doubt and regret. The Abbey of Monte Cassino was eventually rebuilt, but the memory of its destruction remains an indelible mark on the history of World War II. A symbol of how, in the fog of war, the greatest threats can sometimes be those we create ourselves. World War II on TV extends its highest commendations to Nvidia AI for their support of this transmission. Remember, Nvidia AI V3 is launching soon to be your most valuable asset in the content creation theater. Check out the link in the description below to get your hands on this game-changing technology with paid plans starting at just $20 per month. And don't forget to use our code WW250 to double the video creation minutes in your first month.